G'day legends, I hope that you're having so far a fantastic weekend. Now, as always, we have a bit to go over. We're going to be looking at the maps as we do have map updates. Yesterday, apologies, we didn't have any. We're going to look at some strikes. We're going to look at some strikes against some Ukrainian equipment, against Russian equipment, and then across the border into Russia as well with what we think may be the first strikes with American weapons across there, although we do know there still are some restrictions on that. And we'll talk about Zelensky's response to The Guardian, asking about the restrictions put on Ukrainian long-range weapon systems into Ukraine. Of course, we'll look at the peace conference and how China has said they aren't going. And we have said now for a few weeks that if China and Russia both are not present at this peace conference, well, what is going to be the outcome of this? We do know that China is a huge influence on Russia, but a huge influence in the world too, and where this will end up. At the end of the day, without China's influence, well, it's going to be difficult to get much of anywhere. But I want to look at straight off the bat is protracted war, extended war, and who does this then favour? As I know, people will find arguments, and good arguments, for both. Well, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has said this at a conference yesterday. We all want to stop this war, but the paradox is that the better we prepare for the long haul, the sooner the war can end. Russia must understand that it cannot wait us out. No final decisions are made today, but we have made significant progress on three issues. NATO's plan to play a greater coordinating role in the provision of equipment and training. Largely military aid, 99% comes from NATO allies, so it makes sense that NATO should play a greater role in these efforts, but then also this $40 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine each year. We must maintain at least this level of support each year for as long as necessary, and this is what's being spoken about, is 40 billion euros worth of money going to Ukraine every year for as long as necessary. And we hear about extended war, protracted war, and let's talk a bit about that. And we'll reference back to Jens Stoltenberg on strikes back into Russia as well. Now, personally, I don't see extended war being in Ukraine's favour. We know Ukraine is already suffering a manpower issue that is having a massive effect on morale on the front line. And of course, a protracted extended war does not help this, as well as having millions of citizens moving outside the country. The longer it goes on, the less likely they are to return. But let's talk about strategic tactical notes. The longer this war goes on, the better Russia's defenses in areas like Crimea and Donetsk are going to become. And something that we don't consider and when we don't talk about much is just how costly would advancements into these areas be. And not only how costly would it be now at advancement, but how this cost is rising every week, because we know the defenses are getting better. The Russian military have better tactics and better strategies from the beginning of the war, and they're reconstituting those forces as well. And I'm not an economic expert, but the sanctions obviously have not had the desired effect, and Russia is finding other markets for their products. So the longer this goes on, the less effect these sanctions may actually have. The sanctions could be more of a midterm. Short term, it was going to take some while for the sanctions to kick in. The midterm is when they'd be affected the most, but long term, well, other markets will fill markets that have been lost. And it is giving Russia time to change their economy into more of a wartime economy. And many say this is the reason of why we have seen the shifting in high officials in the Russian Defense Ministry as well. Now, personally, I think it was NATO's failure. The biggest failure so far in this war was not to supply Ukraine with weapons or lifting restrictions when Ukraine had Russia on the ropes, and a weakened Russia at that point in 2022, late, and in early 2023. From then, we just have seen more powerful, more defensive works built in, and we don't talk about what the cost would actually be somewhere like in Crimea, and how that cost then actually rises every passing day. So I don't see that extended, protracted, long war here is to Ukraine and the West's advantage, as well as particularly in democratic countries that will be voting for this. As people say, we don't want a second Afghanistan. But the longer this goes on too, and I talk about those markets and Russia seeking other markets, Russia are seeking other markets and are having some success in these as well. So This is a report that is analysing what the FSB, GRU, SVR, so Russia's like intelligence agencies, are doing. Russia's mandate is due to the strategic neglect and its failures to address the problems that its partners face. Russia may also fail to do this, but for now, frustration with the West in both Africa and the Middle East is high. The point is, while Western states focus on rebuilding their conventional deterrence in Europe, strategic documents emphasising the nature of global competition are being vindicated. Yet, Western states are failing to compete. This must change. Russia is using unconventional warfare to advance its vision of a multipolar world order. This poses threats far beyond Ukraine, and it is critical for Western states' rise to meet that challenge. And of course, things like what is happening in Gaza has then sped up a lot in the Middle East and a lot around the world, and our own failures in countries around the world too, that people then are going, well, let's have a look at Russia. And Russia is coming in with the idea of sovereignty, to work with who's in power, even if we would not work with who is in power. And a great example of this is what Putin has spoken about recently in Uzbekistan about then the Taliban. Now, of course, we are not going to work with the Taliban, but it's considering that Russia would. And this is why they'll have influence in areas like this, because we refuse to do that. Rightfully or wrongfully, we would refuse, where if they can get power there, well, you can see that expansion of control. Now, the question was, news came out that Russia was considering the possibility of removing the Taliban from a list of terrorist organizations. And Putin says, we'll begin with the second part. This was a two-part question. This is constantly being discussed. I will not comment on it now because relations with the Taliban in Afghanistan are constantly being discussed. It cannot be denied that there are problems in Afghanistan. Everyone knows this very well. How can we build our relations with the current regime? It is a different question altogether. However, we have to do it. These are people controlling the country, its territory. They are the power in Afghanistan today, and we must proceed from reality and build relations accordingly. So, like I have said, in that area. Now, of course, we know Russia and America have a funny history in Afghanistan, and Afghanistan eventually coming the victor of both of those invasions in as well. But it's just interesting to see, and I am happy to listen to any counter arguments, but I just don't see protracted, if we talk 5-10 years of this war, I don't see that being in Ukraine's favour. And I think the longer that goes on, knowing how much more costly those offensives are then going to be, if and when they take place, and then the rise out of that into wanting to join NATO in the EU. Could that be pushing that back there as well? I don't know. Something I think is interesting to talk about. Now, let's have a look at some strikes, and then we'll link that with the maps in area. So, of course, yesterday we saw the restrictions lifted for US weapons to be used inside of Russia around the Kharkiv Oblast into Belgorod. Now, a couple of things on this. Ukraine can't use ATACMS, and they can't use long-range weapons, which there has been a little bit of difference between some of the reporting in officials of what can and cannot be used. And we'll look at Zelensky and Jens Stoltenberg again to talk about that. But we have some footage coming out. So I put this up. The Ukrainian armed forces appear to have likely launched their first attack on Belgorod region of the Western Russian, utilizing US-provided weapons footage, appearing to show the launch of at least 8 rockets from then HIMARS. And I'll show you some of this footage. I'll put more of this, sorry, that's not the one. I'll put more of this on the Telegram if you'd like to come and join. So we see rocket taking then off there, and we get some videos out of this region as well of air defense being active, then intercepting at least 2 or 3 things here. Again, not enough to exactly tell what is going on, but it does appear within 24 hours of that, we are seeing then strikes across into there being reported with Western weapons. Now, let's talk a little bit about this and the restrictions. So, Jens Stoltenberg again. Ukraine's right to self-defense. Russia has attacked. Ukraine has tried to defend themselves, and that includes also attacking legitimate targets inside Russia. If you look at the battlefield now, Russia is launching attacks on Ukrainian soil. From Russian soil with artillery, missiles, they are amassing troops. And of course, it makes it very hard for Ukraine to defend themselves if they're not allowed to use advanced weapons to repel those attacks. Now, the question is, do you fear now an escalation from Russia? Do you think Russia could strike back against NATO territory itself? Now, this is nothing new. For instance, the UK has provided Storm Shadow cruise missiles for a long time without any restrictions. Now, this is incorrect, we believe, because of an interview as well as Zelensky yesterday that there still are some restrictions on then the Storm Shadow missiles, and we haven't seen the Storm Shadows used then inside of Russia yet either, at least to my knowledge. he, being Putin, gave a speech where he threatened all countries that were going to provide any support to Ukraine, and that was dangerous and will have consequences. And that has been the message every time we've made decisions to deliver long-range artillery, HIMARS, advanced battle tanks, cruise missiles, and F-16s. So this is part of the efforts by President Putin, by Moscow to prevent NATO allies from supporting Ukraine to defend themselves. And again, Ukraine has the right to self-defense. We have the right to help Ukraine uphold their right for self-defense, and that does not make NATO allies party to the conflict. Now, I don't agree with this. If you wouldn't say that NATO is at war with Russia, whether through Ukraine or not, and whether there's, guys on the ground, we know through leaked calls that there are UK and French officers on the ground, most likely conducting the planning and strategic elements for Storm Shadow Scalp missiles. We're supplying everything in, including French talking about troops. Now, I would also say on the flip side that Iran, North Korea are then at war there as well. Whether it's through proxy or not, regardless, I don't think we can give a few $100 billion, talk about troops, help with all the ISR capabilities to guide bombs in, and then say we're not a party to the conflict. That is, in my opinion, that is bullshit. But we do see these threats every time from Russia without the response. But there has to be a line in the sand somewhere. And I've asked, where is our line in the sand? And where is their actual line in the sand of when things then start to happen? What would be our response to that? But even with these restrictions lifted and some restrictions still placed, Zelensky's not happy with it. That in his Guardian interview, Zelensky made clear he needed to be able to use powerful long-range weapons that could hit targets inside deep Russian territory. A red line with the White House has refused to lift. The US, he said, needed to believe in us more. Without this green light, Zelensky said other allies such as the UK may not allow Ukraine to use their long-range weapons either. Believe us, we have to respond. They don't understand anything but force. We are not the first and not then the last. So Zelensky's still requesting then those other restrictions lifted, that it's still not going to be enough of what we see. And I think eventually we're just stepping restriction, same as the tank, same as everything else before. Eventually those will be lifted. And I think troops into Ukraine is going to be the same level of force. It'll have rear line, logistic, training, then you'll have second line, and then eventually you'll have it. We're just this creep forward, and we've seen the creep forward of our own red lines restrictions as well, whether it be armoured vehicles, whether it be jets in the air, whether it be strikes back into Russia as well. But I do ask where actually is then that red line? Now, we do have some footage and some satellite imagery coming out confirming some claims as well. So an oil terminal in the Kavaz port has been hit by Ukrainian long-range weapons as well. So we can see here, this is where this then sits. We'll zoom out. So this is right between Crimea and Russia here. Now we got then this first photograph came out of it then on fire here, and you can see some ships in then the foreground. Now we come to then the satellite imagery, and what we can see is then all the ships that were here have then moved, and then at least 3 of these oil tanks then have been struck from there, with the remaining appearing to not take any damage. So that is confirming some of that, as well as we had this shitty bloody satellite imagery from the Luhansk airfield that we presume was hit by ATACMS and then burnt, but we couldn't make out anything in this. An updated photograph then has come out showing that it was a Nebo air defense system, a very important and very expensive air defense system. Some are saying between $80 and $100 million, has likely been destroyed in this fire and on these strikes as well. Like I always say, give it a couple of days and magically evidence of strikes starts then coming forward. Now, let's have then a look at the map. So, of course, here is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22 and purple since 2014. Now, we'll come up Kharkiv Oblast, Belgrade. Now, this is one of the areas of which everyone's eyes have been in Sumy, in Kharkiv. Is there going to be a cross up here? Where is the westernmost push? We don't know. And of course, these strikes going back in as well. But Ukraine needs to be very, very careful with these strikes. We have seen strike go out from Kharkiv and hit civilian buildings, civilian targets in Belgrade. The US, UK, all these countries, I believe, should and will be watching very carefully for how their weapon systems are used in here, as it could give Russia a whole new slew of informational warfare if that then happens. But we are seeing Russia still have a lot of control over Kharkiv with drones in the air and strikes. And today is no different. So this is Kharkiv here, and this is this ring road around Kharkiv. Now, Russia got basically right up to this ring road at then one point in their offensive. So we can see then just here we have footage then of a Ukrainian truck carrying armoured vehicles then being watched and then being struck with a Lancet here as well. So as it then makes this turn, then we see then that being struck there. So there's still a hell of a lot of observation as well as strikes being conducted over there. And as we know from an attack overnight, none of the S-300 missiles that were fired from Russia into Kharkiv were then intercepted. Now, let's actually have a look on the maps. Now, there's no change up here, but we come down to Berestov, no change shown on this map, although Syriac is showing some here. We can have a look in here. We can see this funny shaped paddock that these are showing then fairly similar. But of course, it's difficult because these are taken at different times of the year. But again, I don't think this is showing any major difference, although there is some on the western side that does show a little bit different. But situation like that front, Russian army continued the pressure along the front line and managed to capture some positions southeast of Novoselivsky. Clashes with the Ukrainian army continue south of Berestov, which is practically under Russian control. And both maps confirm that practically then under Russian control, but nothing down on this eastern side down here until then we get to then Bakhmut. Now, we do see a change then in Chasiv Yar here. Now, this is from geo-confirmed footage we have seen a couple of weeks ago now with Ukrainian troops working in this area and Russian troops also working in this area. So there has been a push up here, just a small one into Chasiv Yar, but confirming this break-in into here. And there is footage coming out of this area now being hit with TOS-1 as well, which is the thermobaric system. Actually, I should say TOS. I'm not sure if it is the one. We know there's a new variant there as well that it has then extended the range. Then we come down into Avdiivka and we do see out from Solyvov, we do see an extension out in the direction of Novopokrovsky as well here. Now, the movements will be down to try and go town to town. It's too dangerous to be out into this open ground, but that is the only change we see on the deep state map on then this front. But we have then two Syriac maps here as well. So it does show this same area right here. That is the same, but does show a massive amount of closing up out from Semenivka here as well, shown by the grey zone here. So if you can see where this corner is, it's saying it's right up to this corner and cutting back through in here. So nothing too dissimilar. It's probably what we'd expect with the grey zone in here, and also shows what we reported as well. This is Ulmansky just here, and this is Netilyove, this closing up of territory. And now these two maps are showing the same thing here, as well as the control over then this area between Yasno and Borivka as well. So that will be interesting to see where that then moves. We have then a second Syriac map update in then the same area here, showing just up from Osheretny front. So just here. So this is Osheretny, this is Solyvov. So up in this northern area, it is pushing out in this direction as well, but you can see it's closed up along the top here as well, which we would expect as well from where that grey zone and where the ground and the waterway is sitting, but some ground there, but also between Netilyove and sort of the Ulmansk front down here, a further close up of territory. See where this road runs? This is this road, so closing up then this paddock in here, and I do think we will see all of this turn to grey zone and potentially then red at some point because of the limited areas now for a withdrawal out of here for Ukraine. Now, let's see what Russia says. Russia army continues to advance along the Netilyove in Ulmansk line right here. On the other hand, the fighting has already moved from the first houses up here, that's in this northern area we're talking about, near the source of the Bokchok River. Some positions were taken by Russian forces on the eastern and southern outskirts of then the locality. So we have another update as well, then with a geolocation, which is what is always good. So we have Krasnoyarivka, no update shown here. Now we don't have a map here, but it shows then this footage. Situation west Donetsk city. During the last hours, Russian army took control over the city council of Krasnoyarivka. Despite earlier reports of the capture of this building, it appears that Russian troops only managed to consolidate control a few hours ago. Fighting continues along these streets with no discernible change. Ukrainian army manages to hold its positions despite the loss of the eastern defenses. So let's actually have a look at where exactly this sits and then compare it to then the map. So we see industrial area here. We can see where this dual road that comes into a single. This is the city council building just here. Let's zoom in. So we're talking right about here, I believe. So it's not the easiest to see where this road turns down. So we're talking right about in here somewhere, but these maps show very, very similar. Now, one update on this map, which is very, very interesting and about time, is Russian advancement into Robotny. Now, we know this likely looks far different actually to this, but I think this will trickle in on days when there's not much update. It will trickle in on what the changes are actually in here. And of course, Russia is regaining positions of what it had on its defensive works as well in here. This is why I believe, as far as the informational space of this map, that it wants to just give little updates in here and hoping that Ukraine has a pushback in here and then they don't have to update in here. But we believe from what we've seen, geolocated footage well up into here as well, that there's definitely Russian presence. May it be grey zone because there's just nothing to actually have defense in potentially, but other maps, including Ukrainian maps, show a very different situation right on here. Now, last thing I want to talk about is then the peace conference. And you and I have said, unless China or Russia is here, it's not a peace conference, it's a support conference for Ukraine to garner more support around the world, more weapons. And if it's starting at the 10-point peace plan, well, it's not a negotiation or conference around peace. It's for more weapons because at the moment, with the reality on the ground, that peace plan, it needs to have a military victory. China says it will not join Swiss peace conference in Ukraine. China will not attend Ukrainian peace conference in Switzerland next month because it does not meet its expectations, which include both Russia and Ukraine taking part. And then the arrangements for the meeting still fall short of China's requests and the general expectations of the international community, making it difficult for China to participate. China has always insisted that an international peace conference should be endorsed by both Russia and Ukraine with the equal participation of all parties, and that all peace proposals should be discussed in a fair and equal manner, or otherwise it will be difficult for it to play a substantive role in the restoring peace. Again, Ukraine see restoring peace through a military victory on the ground, so therefore the peace conference is to get more support, guarantees, money in for that. Now, I believe we will see, because we have about 2 weeks until this conference, Russia try and really get some ground here and have a big push, because it will have an effect on how people go into that peace conference. If you can see Russia's making a lot of ground, people are going to see that. Other diplomats around the world go, holy shit, look what we're doing. And it may affect how they set. Maybe then they'll go, we need to give more money. Or maybe they'll go, we need to negotiate out of this. It depends. It's always a roll of the dice with how information works. But this is interesting too, that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov suggested on Thursday that China could arrange a peace conference in which Russia and Ukraine take part. So it will be very interesting to see if something like that could potentially happen in the future. But as we know, and as we've spoken about, without China or Russia present, then what will actually really come of this as far as peace probably shouldn't be in the title. It's a military conference to get more support for military aid to Ukraine to achieve their goals, because it's starting at that peace plan, which points 5 and 6 talk about territorial integrity, which we know Russia does not want to give that up. So if it is going to change, it has to be taken militarily. Anyway, legends, look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.